The September wind carried dust and the scent of dying sage across the abandoned homestead. Clara Whitmore stood at the edge of what had once been someone's dream, now just weathered wood and broken promises scattered across the Wyoming territory. Her traveling dress, once pristine blue cotton, now bore the stains of 3 weeks on the road, running from a life that no longer fit. She hadn't meant to stop here. The stagecoach wouldn't return for another day, and the small town of Cedar Ridge offered little comfort to a woman traveling alone. But something about this place, the way the late afternoon sun painted the ruins golden, the way the wind seemed to whisper through the collapsed barn, had drawn her feet down the overgrown path. That's when she saw it. Half buried beneath a pile of autumn leaves near what had been the front porch, a piece of carved wood caught the light. Clara knelt, her gloved hands brushing away years of neglect. It was a totem, not Native American, but the work of some settler's hands. Crude but earnest, depicting what looked like a family, a man, woman, and child, their faces worn smooth by weather and time. The wood was split down the middle, separating the family. The sight hit her like a physical blow. It's been there near on 5 years now. Clara's heart jumped. She spun around to find a man watching her from the shadow of a gnarled cottonwood. He was perhaps 40, with sun-weathered skin and grey threading through dark hair. His clothes were simple, work shirt, worn denim, boots that had seen countless miles. But his eyes held a stillness that reminded her of deep water. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone—" Clara stood quickly, clutching the broken totem to her chest. "I was just looking for something," he finished, stepping closer. His voice was quiet, measured. "Most folks who end up here are." There was no judgment in his tone, only a kind of gentle understanding that made Clara's throat tight. She looked down at the carved figures in her hands. "Did you know them? The family who lived here? The Hendersons? Good people?" He gestured to the totem. Jacob carved that when their son was born, said it was to keep the family together no matter what came. His eyes grew distant. "Didn't work out that way. What happened?" "Life," he said simply. "Hard winter of '89, lost the baby to fever. After that," he shrugged. "Some things break clean. Others," his gaze fell to the split totem. "Others take more time to show the damage." Clara felt tears threatening. She understood about damage that took time to show. "I'm Samuel Creek," the man offered. "Got a small place about a mile west. You're the woman from the afternoon stage?" "Clara Whitmore." She hesitated. "I'm traveling, running," he corrected gently, and she looked up sharply. "Takes one to know one. I came through here 6 years ago, carrying my own broken pieces." The wind picked up, sending leaves dancing around their feet. Clara shivered, not entirely from cold. "What did you do with your broken pieces?" Samuel's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. "Learned that some things are worth fixing. Others," he looked at the totem in her hands, "others teach you something about yourself if you're willing to listen. And this? That's for you to decide." He turned to go, then paused. "If you're staying in town tonight, Mrs. Peterson's boarding house serves decent stew, and if you're of a mind," he nodded toward the totem, "I've got tools and a steady hand. Sometimes what's broken just needs someone willing to see what it could be again." As he walked away, Clara looked down at the carved family in her hands. The split ran jagged between them, but the wood was still solid, still beautiful in its imperfection. Like looking in a mirror, for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than emptiness in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the memory of what hope felt like. The sun was setting, painting the abandoned homestead in shades of gold and shadow. Clara tucked the totem carefully into her traveling bag and began the walk back to town. Behind her, the wind continued its whispered conversation with the sage. The boarding house breakfast was simple but warm. Eggs, bacon and bread that actually tasted like Mrs. Peterson cared about more than just filling stomachs. Clara sat by the window, watching Cedar Ridge wake up. It was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 200 souls scattered along a single main street. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but also where a cup of coffee stayed hot and nobody hurried you along. "You're the lady who was out at the Henderson place yesterday." Clara looked up to find a woman about her own age, auburn hair pinned back severely, observing her with frank curiosity. News travels fast. In a town this size, a sparrow can't land without folks knowing which tree it came from. The woman's smile was warmer than her words. "I'm Martha Daniels. My husband runs the general store." "Clara Whitmore. Samuel Creek mentioned you might be staying a few days." Martha slid into the opposite chair uninvited. "He's a good man, Samuel. Quiet, but good. Lost his wife and daughter in a wagon accident back in Colorado. Came here looking for somewhere to disappear, but ended up becoming the best carpenter this side of Cheyenne." Clara's chest tightened. She understood about losing everything, about looking for somewhere to disappear. "He offered to help me with something," Clara said carefully. "The totem." Martha nodded. "Figured as much. He's got gentle hands with broken things." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Can I give you some advice? Whatever you're running from, and honey, it's written all over your face. Samuel Creek isn't the kind of man who asks questions you're not ready to answer. But he's also not the kind to let you disappear into your hurt if he thinks he can help." After breakfast, Clara found herself walking west out of town. The morning air was crisp, promising winter wasn't far behind. She found Samuel's place easily enough, a neat cabin with a workshop attached, smoke rising from the chimney. The sound of careful work echoed from inside. She knocked, and after a moment the door opened. Samuel looked surprised but pleased. "Didn't know if you'd come." "I almost didn't." Clara pulled the totem from her bag. "I've been carrying this all night, and I keep thinking, maybe some things are meant to stay broken." Samuel studied her face for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. Coffee's fresh." The workshop was a revelation. Every tool had its place, every piece of wood sorted by type and quality. Half-finished projects lined the shelves, a chair with intricate carved roses, a clock case with flowing grain, a child's toy horse with such careful attention to detail, it looked ready to gallop. "You're an artist," Clara breathed. "Just a carpenter." But she could see he was pleased. "My father always said wood wants to be beautiful. You just have to listen to what it's trying to tell you." Clara set the totem on his workbench. In the morning light streaming through the window, the damage looked even more pronounced. The split ran through the center of the family, leaving the man on one side, the woman and child on the other. Samuel picked it up, turning it in his hands with the reverence of someone who understood the weight of broken things. "Jacob Henderson carved this with a whittling knife and determination," he murmured. "No formal training, but heart. That's got heart in every line." He looked at Clara. "What do you see when you look at it?" "A family torn apart." "And?" Clara studied the piece more carefully. "Despite the split, despite the years of weather damage, there was something about the way the figures leaned toward each other, the protective curve of the parents' bodies around their child. Love," she whispered. "Even broken, they're still reaching for each other." Samuel nodded. "That's what I see too. This isn't about putting something back exactly the way it was. That split happened for a reason. Wood doesn't break clean unless there's been pressure building for a long time." He set it down gently. "But broken doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes it means ready for something new." He selected a piece of fine sandpaper and began working on one of the rougher edges, with movement so careful, Clara found herself holding her breath. "My wife used to say I fixed things because I couldn't fix myself," Samuel continued, his voice quiet. "Took me a long time to understand she had it backwards. We fix things to remember that fixing is possible." "How long did it take?" Clara asked. "To remember?" Samuel's hands paused for just a moment. "Still working on it some days, but it gets easier when you're not carrying it all alone." "Adl." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Samuel with his gentle sanding, Clara watching and occasionally handing him tools. The workshop smelled of wood shavings and the coffee cooling on the windowsill. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving the morning peaceful and still. "Tell me about the Hendersons," Clara said eventually. "They came west with big dreams and bigger hearts. Jacob was a dreamer, always talking about the orchards he'd plant, the cattle he'd raise. Sarah was the practical one, but she believed in his dreams enough for both of them." Samuel's hands never stopped their careful work. When little Thomas was born, Jacob carved this, said every family needed something to hold them together when the world tried to pull them apart. But it didn't work. Oh, it worked fine. They stayed together through that baby's illness, through the worst winter this territory had seen in decades. Even when they lost the farm, they had each other. Samuel looked up at her. It was only after Sarah died that Jacob left. Couldn't bear the memories, I reckon. Left everything behind, including this. He just abandoned it. Sometimes when something hurts too much, we think the answer is to run from it. Samuel's eyes met hers with gentle understanding. But running doesn't heal the break, just changes the scenery. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. And sometimes staying means watching everything you love turn to dust. Sometimes, Samuel agreed, but not always. And not this time, if you're willing to let me show you something. He picked up a thin brush and a small pot of what looked like glue mixed with fine wood dust. With infinite patience, he began filling in the smallest cracks and imperfections, not hiding them but reinforcing them, making them part of the story rather than flaws to be concealed. "In Japan," he said softly, "they have a way of fixing broken pottery with gold, makes the break part of the beauty instead of something to be ashamed of." He looked at Clara. "Broken doesn't mean worthless, Clara. Sometimes it means ready to become something even more beautiful." For the first time since leaving Boston, Clara felt tears that weren't born of despair, but of something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The October days fell into a rhythm that surprised Clara with its gentleness. Each morning, she'd walk to Samuel's workshop with 2 cups of coffee from Mrs. Peterson's kitchen. They'd work on the totem together, sometimes talking, sometimes letting the quiet sounds of restoration fill the space between them. The piece was transforming under Samuel's patient hands. Where once there had been only a jagged split, now there was careful joinery, reinforcing dowels, and what he called honest repair. Fixing that didn't pretend the break had never happened, but instead made it part of the story. "You're getting good at that," Samuel observed on a particularly crisp morning, watching Clara carefully sand one of the smaller cracks with the grain instead of against it. "I had a good teacher." Clara blew the dust away, pleased to see the wood's natural pattern emerging. "Though I should probably warn you, I've never been particularly good with my hands. My husband always said I was more decorative than useful." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She'd been so careful not to mention William, but something about the peaceful workshop had loosened her guard. Samuel's hands stilled on his own work. "Your husband." It wasn't a question, but Clara heard the invitation in it. She set down her sandpaper and stared at the totem's emerging features. William Whitmore, Boston's most promising young attorney, according to the newspapers. Her voice carried a bitterness she couldn't quite hide. "Married me because I was pretty and well-connected. Kept me because I looked good on his arm at political dinners. And you left because..." Clara was quiet for so long, Samuel probably thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I realized I was disappearing, piece by piece, year by year, until I wasn't sure there was anything left of me that was actually me." She picked up the totem, running her finger along the line where Samuel had begun fitting the pieces back together. "Have you ever felt invisible in your own life?" "Yes," Samuel said simply, and the honesty in his voice made her look up. "When?" He set down his tools and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that rimmed the valley. "After the accident, everyone in town was so kind, so careful around me. They'd talk about Emma and little Rose like they were made of glass, afraid that saying their names wrong would break me worse. He turned back to her. But I was already broken. Their kindness just made me feel like a ghost haunting his own life. What changed? Time, work, and finally understanding that Emma wouldn't have wanted me to disappear. His smile was sad, but real. She used to tell me I thought too much, said I could think myself into a knot a sailor couldn't untie. Guess even dead she was still right. Clara found herself almost smiling. She sounds wonderful. She was. Stubborn as a mule and twice as smart as me. Probably would have liked you. He picked up the totem again, studying their progress. What will you do when this is finished? The question hung in the air between them. Clara had been dreading it, even as she looked forward to the totem's completion. I don't know, she admitted. I can't go back to Boston. William, he made it clear that leaving him was the same as choosing scandal over security. My family agreed with him. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out when you're decorative, nobody much cares what you think. And staying here? I'm a city woman, Samuel. I don't know the first thing about frontier life. I can't cook, can't sew worth a damn, and I've never grown so much as a flower that didn't die within a week. She gestured helplessly. What would I do here? Samuel was quiet for a moment, then walked to one of his shelves and picked up the half-finished clock case she'd admired on her first visit. See this grain pattern? The way it flows like water? He traced the lines with his finger. Most folks would have cut this piece straight, made it plain and simple, but the wood had other ideas. All I did was listen to what it wanted to be. I'm not a piece of wood, Samuel. No, but you're not decorative either. These past weeks, watching you work, he set the case down carefully. You have patience, real patience, not the kind that's forced. And you see things. Notice when the grain changes direction, when a joint needs just a little more time to set right. Those aren't small gifts. Clara felt her throat tighten. William used to say I had no practical skills. William sounds like a fool. The quiet anger in Samuel's voice surprised them both. Sorry, that's not my place to say. Maybe not, but thank you for saying it anyway. They worked in comfortable silence after that, Clara feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. As the morning wore on, she found herself watching Samuel's hands, the way they moved with such certainty, such gentle strength. When had she stopped noticing the beauty in careful work? Around noon, Martha Daniels appeared in the doorway with a basket that smelled like heaven. Figured you two would be too absorbed in your project to remember food, she said, setting the basket on Samuel's small table. Fresh bread, ham, and some of my apple preserves. Martha, you don't need to, Samuel began. Hush, it's no trouble. Martha looked between them with satisfaction. Besides, the whole town's been watching this little restoration project with interest. Mrs. Peterson says Clara's been looking less like a lost soul and more like a woman every day. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. The whole town is talking about me. Honey, in Cedar Ridge, a new baby or a good storm is front-page news. A mysterious woman and our most eligible bachelor working together on a romantic art project. That's enough gossip to last us through Christmas. Ah, it's not romantic, Clara protested. We're just fixing something broken. Martha and Samuel exchanged a look that made Clara's face burn even hotter. Of course you are, dear, Martha said mildly. And I'm just delivering lunch. After Martha left, Clara couldn't quite meet Samuel's eyes. The easy comfort of the morning had shifted into something more complicated. I should probably clarify, she said carefully. I didn't come here looking for... I'm not ready for... Clara. Samuel's voice was gentle. I know. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just glad you're here. She looked at him then, really looked. Saw the kindness in his weathered face, the patience in his hands, the way he'd created this space where she could remember who she was before William convinced her she was nothing. I'm glad I'm here too, she said softly. That afternoon, as they worked together fitting the final pieces of the totem's repair, Clara realized something had shifted, not just in the carved wood, but in herself. The woman who had fled Boston in desperation was still there, but she was no longer the only one. There was also a woman who could see the grain in wood, who could work with patient hands, who could sit in comfortable silence with a good man and feel whole, not healed, not yet, but whole enough to imagine that healing might be possible. The first snow of the season dusted Cedar Ridge on the morning Clara and Samuel put the final touches on the totem. 6 weeks of careful work had transformed the broken carving into something both familiar and entirely new. The split was still visible. Samuel had refused to hide it completely. Instead, he'd reinforced it with a technique he called honest joinery, using contrasting wood that made the repair part of the design. The original figures were there, the family that Jacob Henderson had carved with such love, but now they were connected by something that spoke of endurance, of choosing to heal rather than simply hoping the pain would disappear. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, turning the finished piece in her hands. The weight felt different now, not heavier, but more substantial, as if the process of mending had given it new gravity. "It's honest," Samuel corrected gently. "Beautiful is just what happens when something is completely itself." They were sitting in his workshop, early morning light streaming through windows that Clara had helped him wash just days before. The routine of working together had become as natural as breathing. Her hands seemed to know which tool he'd need before he asked. His quiet presence had become the anchor that kept her from drifting back into the grey hopelessness that had driven her west. What happens now? The question had been building in her for days, but this morning, with the totem complete and winter settling over the valley, it could no longer be avoided. Samuel set down the cloth he'd been using to polish the wood surface. "That depends on what you want to happen." "I'm scared," Clara admitted. "I've been here almost 2 months, and I feel more myself than I have in years. But what if that's just because this place is like a pause from real life? What if I can't hold on to this feeling once winter ends and the world starts moving again?" "What if you can?" Clara looked at him, really looked. Over the weeks, she'd memorized the way his hands moved when he worked, the quiet concentration on his face, the gentle patience in his voice when he explained some technique or told her stories about the wood they were using. When had she stopped thinking of him as the stranger who'd found her at the Henderson place and started thinking of him as, what? A friend felt too small a word. Something more felt too large, too frightening. "Samuel, I need you to know. I'm grateful for what you've done, what you've given me. But I'm not the same woman who left Boston. I don't know who I'm becoming, and it wouldn't be fair to ask you to wait while I figure it out." Samuel was quiet for so long, Clara wondered if she'd offended him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same careful consideration he brought to his work. 6 years ago, when I first came here, I was so broken I couldn't see past the next day, couldn't imagine wanting anything beyond just making it through." He picked up the totem again, running his thumb along the repaired joint. "But broken doesn't mean finished, Clara. Sometimes it just means ready for something new. And if the something new doesn't work, if I'm not brave enough or strong enough then we figure it out together." The simple certainty in his voice made her chest tight. "If you want to, that is. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or even next year. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to stay and see what grows." Outside, the snow was falling harder now, turning the world soft and quiet. Clara thought about the woman who had fled Boston, desperate, empty, convinced she had nothing left to lose. That woman had been right about one thing. The life she'd been living was over. But she'd been wrong about having nothing left. She'd had herself, buried and forgotten maybe, but not gone. Mrs. Peterson mentioned yesterday that she might be looking for help at the boarding house, Clara said slowly. Someone to help with the cooking and the books. It wouldn't pay much, but it would be enough to rent a room, maybe save a little. Samuel's face stayed carefully neutral. "That sounds like a good opportunity. It would mean staying through the winter, maybe longer." "It would." Clara picked up the totem, feeling its new strength in her hands. The original carving was still there, Jacob Henderson's vision of family, of love that endures. But now it carried something else. The scars of its breaking, yes, but also the evidence of hands willing to repair, to reinforce, to make something broken into something beautiful. "I want to give this back to Jacob," she said suddenly. "If we can find him, he should know that what he made, it wasn't lost. It was just waiting for the right hands to help it heal." Samuel smiled, the first truly unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "I think that's a fine idea, and I think I might know how to find him." "Really?" Martha mentioned last week that her cousin in Cheyenne knows a Jacob Henderson who works at the rail yard. "Might be our Jacob, might not, but it's worth a letter." Clara nodded, then set the totem carefully on the workbench. "Samuel, I want you to know, I'm still scared. I still don't know if I'm brave enough for whatever this is." She gestured between them, around the workshop that had become a sanctuary. "But I want to try. If you're willing to be patient with a woman who's still learning how to put herself back together." Samuel stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the small scar on his chin that she'd wondered about for weeks. "Clara, patience is what I do best. And besides..." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "I think we're both still learning that. Maybe we can learn together." When he kissed her, it was with the same gentle certainty he brought to his work. Patient, careful, full of quiet promise. Clara felt something in her chest unfurl, something that had been clenched tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I can't promise I won't run again," she whispered. "I can't promise I won't let you," he whispered back. "But I can promise I'll be here when you're ready to come home." Home. The word settled around her like the snow settling on the valley outside, gentle, inevitable, transforming the landscape into something both familiar and entirely new. 3 months later, when the reply came from Cheyenne, Clara and Samuel made the journey together. Jacob Henderson was indeed working at the rail yard, and when they found him, he was exactly what Clara had imagined. Weathered hands, kind eyes, and a smile that lit up his whole face when he saw the totem. "I'd given up on ever seeing this again," he said, turning it over in his hands with reverence. "After Sarah died, I couldn't bear to look at it. Reminded me too much of what I'd lost." "Now?" Clara asked gently. Jacob studied the visible repair, the way Samuel had reinforced the break without trying to hide it. "Now I see what I couldn't then. That breaking isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a different one." On the train ride home to Cedar Ridge, and Clara realized with a start that she'd thought home without hesitation, she and Samuel sat in comfortable silence, watching the Wyoming landscape roll past. Clara thought about the woman who had fled Boston, carrying nothing but desperation and a small bag of belongings. She thought about the broken totem, abandoned and forgotten, until someone with patient hands and a belief in second chances had found it. Some things, she realized, were worth breaking for, worth the risk of falling apart if it meant you might have the chance to put yourself back together as something truer, stronger, more honestly yourself. The train wheels kept their steady rhythm, carrying them toward whatever came next. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara was eager to find out what that might be.